Okay, we come back together. Take your seats, please. I'm delighted that Sarah Holmes has joined us. Sarah is a lecturer in early childhood studies at Liverpool Hope University, and she's been researching into the church's ministry with families, and that's what she's going to talk to us about now.
Thanks. Sarah. Great. Thank you. Yes, it's good. I feel quite privileged because I get to stand and stretch the whole way through, so that's good. But I'm so delighted to be with you today. Thank you so much. So just very briefly, a bit about me. I'm from the Wirral near Liverpool, and for quite a few years I worked as a children's and family worker in a few different churches. Now I'm just a volunteer in my local church, which is lovely and wonderful. Very involved there. But also, as we just heard, I'm a teacher early childhood, but I research children's faith and the church's response. And I think what I love about that is that perhaps those things that we think, oh, I don't know if everybody else is experiencing this same problem or this same issue or this same opportunity or effectiveness. I love to hear those things and try and gather them together and share those patterns that people are seeing across the way, but also to help churches to identify where is God working, where are the opportunities, and how can we then join in with that. So I absolutely love my work. I've got four children myself at home as well, so that gives me a bit of a way to kind of try things out. And also I think it gives me a bit of an insight into, you know, their school, those contexts, the community and so on, which is great. So I've done various different bits and bobs of research with various organisations that are on this slide there. Currently I'm doing something with the Growing Faith Foundation, some of you may be aware of as well. I've done quite a lot in Liverpool Diocese, looking at baptism ministry and that sort of thing over the years. So, but I kind of wanted to say, it's been fascinating listening to all the discussion this morning, but my head was starting to feel full already, so I'm surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if you are, having been here since yesterday. But I want to ask you now, just in this little bit of time we've got together, what is the place of the child in what we've been discussing? What is the place of families in what we've been talking about? Now, some of you might think, well, it's all right, we haven't got any kids in our church, so it doesn't matter. Perhaps you need to listen even more intently. Perhaps you might think, well, actually, I don't really want children there, because they might, you know, they get in the way, they interrupt things, it's a bit messy, but we have to change things a bit, you know. So I want to try and sort of help us to think through some of that. Perhaps something I'm told quite frequently is, well, I'm not qualified to work with children. I don't know anything about children. I've not had kids of my own. I just don't know what to do. Well, perhaps this might help you as well. So what I want to do is to just spend a moment, let's reimagine together, what could it be like? What could it be like if we had churches filled with families wanting to be there, not sort of coerced or bribed, you know, to come and we'll give you sort of something nice, but wanting to be there, part of what's going on, involved in the actual worship delivery, involved in the mission, shaping and transforming what we're doing. We're seeing children growing up with a strong faith and wanting to be part of what's going on. So how can we get there? How can we get to that place of seeing parents and carers feeling confident in raising their children with us as partner, with the churches as a partner alongside? What does it take to get there? And I've picked up that the word strategy isn't really going down too well at the moment, so I won't go with that. But I want to go with the word intentional, because I do think, having listened to many, many churches, many families, many children, sometimes we are not so intentional about what we're doing. Perhaps sometimes we are so bogged down with all the paperwork we're hearing about, all these different things, we've got to write strategies, write visions, all this kind of thing. So perhaps we don't have time to actually be intentional and think, what do I want to do in this way? How can I, in my interactions that I'm already having, how can I be more welcoming and inclusive and involving children and families? So that's what I want us to be thinking about together. Now, I've put a couple of Bible passages there. I won't go into them too much. I'm sure you know them well. So in Matthew 18, we read about Jesus calling a child and talking about, unless you turn from your sins, become like little children. So using that sense of modelling, Jesus welcoming children. And again, then in chapter 19 there, Jesus brought children, laid hands on them and blessed them. Let the children come to me. Don't stop them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. And he blessed these children. Are we welcoming children and families in our churches in that same way that Jesus did? Using that image of welcoming and blessing children as our guide. Now, as I said, I've got 4 kids, millions of various activities. My wonderful husband is doing all the taxiing around today while I'm here, so I feel like this is quite a nice day off for me. Life is busy for families. I don't need to say that, you know that. And I hear people sometimes say, well, the reason families are not coming to our church is because they're busy. But the fact, I'm here to say, in the nicest possible way, they're choosing what they want to do, okay? And so sometimes people say to me, well, we've asked, what they want and so on, but we're just not hearing. Well, they're not coming to certain activities, which is their way of telling us what it is. And so, I really want us to start to grapple with some of these things about how can we slightly shift the focus of what we're already doing. It's not about piling on lots of extra things to do, but just how can we shift our focus to be more welcoming to children and families. Part of the research that I did was asking people, asking families, asking children, what's church like? Many times children would say to me, well, we just have to sit and wait while the adults finish what they're doing. And I said, well, what do you want from church? And they said, well, somewhere nice to sit while we wait for the adults to finish. And it just really struck me. It made me so sad to think, is that what our children are experiencing of church? Is that what church is to them, that it's only for adults and we just have to sit there and wait, not even in a comfortable place? And what's that like? One story that really struck me, after the pandemic, we did various bits of research asking families, parents, about going back. And I'll dig into it a bit more soon. But one mum was a bit hesitant to returning to church after the pandemic and went in. Things weren't quite the same. We all can relate to that, can't we? It wasn't quite what it had been pre-pandemic. And it was a bit awkward. The kids didn't quite know what to do anymore, and it was all a bit tricky. Then at the end of the service, somebody came over to her. She'd had a difficult time trying to keep the kids quiet and so on. Somebody came and said, do you think next week you could put your children in slippers? Because it was a bit loud with them walking around during the service. And I was rather shocked to hear that. Now, hopefully that wouldn't happen in most churches, but I think it perhaps shows us some of the unspoken messages that are coming across in our churches. And I myself am absolutely guilty of this. I know that when a family arrives at church, I tend to talk to the adults. I do. It's just kind of what you do. And actually, the kids often are just standing there waiting. And, how could we slightly shift that so that our conversation is focused on, oh, hi, how are you doing? How was your week? You don't need to be qualified to work with children to just ask how somebody's week has been, or what have you got on later today. That's as simple as it is. And that shows interest. It shows that we care. And actually, the impact of that on the parents is phenomenal. I remember a time I, as a parent, again in that post-pandemic awkward time, I arrived at church. I've got to say, it's not easy getting 4 kids ready to go to church. And so we're doing all this stuff, getting all this. Well, finally we get there, okay? And to be honest, they were a bit, oh, don't want to go, all this. We get there, and then somebody on the door says to me, Sarah, you can relax now. I thought, no, I can't. It's even worse than being at home, because now I have to try and make sure my kids are behaving in a way that everybody here is expecting. I need to try and coach them through. One of my kids Doesn't particularly like social interactions, so that always heightens things. It's a bit tricky. One of my children at the time was 2, so I don't need to explain how tricky that was. Churches are not typically places for parents to relax. But if somebody says to my children when they arrive, how was your week? Oh, you've had a spelling test. How did that go? Oh, you've got the SATs coming up. How was that? And you could even say, oh, would you like me to pray for you this week while you've got your SATs? And just that, the message that gives is so powerful. So just want to kind of lay those out in terms of thinking about how we can just shift the messages to be more welcoming. Now, the pandemic's been mentioned a few times already. I did quite a lot of research around this. It was quite a unique time for many ways, of course, but people wanted to talk about how they were feeling, how they were experiencing what was going on. So for a researcher, it was great, actually. People wanted to tell me what churches were or weren't doing, what was going well, what were their struggles, all that kind of thing. And one of the things, I know one of the presenters earlier said this already, but I do want to thank you, because the strong messages coming through at that time, and I know it's true now, is just how exhausting it is for people who are involved in church ministry, and that is, and every single thing that you guys are doing is kingdom building, and so thank you and well done for that. But one of the things in terms of the gifts of the pandemic, I think it showed up what was perhaps there before, a bit like an X-ray, showed up what was there, things that were going on, which we perhaps didn't see so clearly, but it really heightened them and showed. So I've got a few stats I'm going to share with you now about what families and churches were saying. This was reflecting on pandemic times. So like I say, and I think we're in that similar sort of phase now really, but as I say, people really wanted to tell us at the time what they were feeling. So 48% of church leaders said that church families now engage less with their local church than they did pre-pandemic. 26% felt it had stayed similar, and 24% said it had increased. So that may, think about how that's been in your setting, but interesting that about half are saying engagement of families with church is less than pre-pandemic. Within that, we were hearing perhaps some families are attending less often, but they're still a little bit attending, but just not as often. Some had completely stopped coming. And then also, some talked about there's not been that much change in the way relating with children and families, whereas others said that there'd been an improvement, and actually the pandemic had given opportunity to improve that relationship. We've already been hearing just now about relationship and the importance of that. 25%, which is a significant number, felt there'd been a negative impact, lasting impact there. So this sense of, and again, this perhaps resonates with things we've been hearing this morning, a lack of energy and vision. We're just so exhausted. Smaller teams, less people willing to be involved as volunteers now, and this sense of reduced engagement with families. Now this was really interesting here. 3/4 of the churches that we spoke to said that they had been done really well at supporting families within their church community. That was kind of what they'd done in the pandemic. What did you do in the pandemic? We supported families. And yet, when we asked the families, how much has your church felt as a support, actually less than half of the families said that it had. And a third, in fact, said that they hadn't. So I think there's a bit of a disconnection there, because I know, how hard people work to do those, little activity packs people took round to families and creating all these things and all that kind of thing. But actually, I think we had 2% of people found those pieces of paper and craft activities and so on helpful. And so what this is encouraging to us, because what families were saying was, actually, we don't want loads of pieces of paper or lots of extra activities. We don't want all of those things which create lots of work for us. What they were wanting was relationship, which again, we've been talking about this morning. So this is what families were saying. 66% of families said they felt withdrawn and disconnected. I'm sure we can relate with that in the pandemic. But this is the very interesting thing. 42% said that their faith had increased or been enriched, and a further 10% talked about it in terms of discipleship at home had increased. So there we have 52% said, even though my connection with church was diminished, actually our faith at home was increased. And that is so fascinating to see, because we so often, interesting you were just talking there about the Monday to Saturday thing, we so often portray this message in our churches that come on a Sunday, we'll give you all you need, there we go, right, off you go, cheerio, bye-bye. And actually that's so unhelpful, because what we're seeing is that families were wanting to be having faith at home, but many were saying, can you help us with that? We don't know what to do. So if you think about, for example, people who have come to faith in adulthood, they have no experience to draw on from their own childhood. What does it look like to pray with your child at bedtime? Many people don't know. Perhaps when they were a child, things were different. Perhaps, they've had all sorts of life experiences. To simply talk about that, you could pray with your child at bedtime. Here's a few ideas of prayers. Perhaps put on the little notice sheet or an email that's going out every week. Here are a few ideas of, here's a question, one question, keep it simple. One question you could talk to your children about this week is, what's their favourite story from the Bible? And you can, the parent or carer can tell their favourite one. So making these really easy opportunities for families in our churches to be continually resourced for their faith at home. And so some of these quotes on here, parents were saying they'd had more intentional children's worship at home. Faith had become part of everyday life where it hadn't before, and more spiritual conversations. Now, it'd be interesting to ask these same families now whether that's kind of stayed, and not everybody has, I think. But again, is that because of this underlying message we're constantly saying as the church, that we know, what's best for your child? So bring them to Sunday school, here we go, or whatever you call it, on a Sunday morning. Here you go, here's their spiritual feeding, rightio, see you next week, and make sure you come every week, because then you'll get a sticker, And is that what we're wanting? Is that actually what we're trying to achieve? That we're trying to achieve, well, we got 15 children this week, that's much better than last week. Or is it that we want those children, for their faith, to be enriched, to be live, to be living and developing? And actually, I think we want that latter, if we are intentionally thinking about it. And so how can we capture those opportunities to say, right, parents, it's a partnership, parents and carers, I should say, it's a partnership. And here's a little idea. And that takes time to make that transition there. So, what do churches think parents want? This was interesting. We said to churches, what do you think parents or carers want? 29% talked about reconnection, which was kind of matching. 15% said about support. 15% talked about being encouraged, valued and listened to. And 26% said, we think parents want to be supported to grow the Christian faith at home. But then when we tracked across and looked at the same responses from those church leaders, what are they doing? They were not really doing those things. And so again, it's back to this word of intentionality. We just we get so stuck because we've got all these things we've got to do. Our church structures are so set. We've got all these policies we've got to follow, all these paperwork we've got to do, all this. There's not time to perhaps say, is that actually what we want to be doing? And so actually, thinking about how can we just make slight shifts in what we're doing rather than adding on, as I say, lots of extra work there. And one of the biggest things as well that came across, now I did this research, the top diagram is in the UK, and then I also did this research in Canada and the States as well, and some other countries that I can't just remember right now. And the same message was coming across in all of them. Basically, the churches didn't think they should be the sole provider of spiritual feeding for children. And the parents didn't think the church should be the sole spiritual feeder, or whatever we want to say, discipler of the children. And it just came through so strongly, this sense that both parents and carers and the church are wanting to work together. But I haven't actually put this stat on, but as we again tracked through the written responses from parents, carers, church leaders, children's workers, all these things, where's the language of partnership and working together? Where are the examples of working together? I think it was like 2 or 3% of people talked about that. And again, people are wanting to do this, but it's not quite actually translated into what's happening. And so really, really interesting that. We're going to really unpack that in the workshop this afternoon in terms of how can we partner with families in an intentional way, but also quite easy, quick wins as well. Also did this work with quite a few countries about, okay, do we need a new plan then? What kind of plan do we need? And so a little bit there seem to just be some deep flaws in what we're kind of already doing. And as I say, this is across the UK, but also many countries, similar sorts of things. And this sense of communicating together, just not great. What's the sense of purpose of what we're doing? Some people have touched on that this morning. We're just not quite sure. And in terms of children, what are we trying to achieve there? Are we trying to achieve, an increase of 10% on last year? Or are we trying to achieve that, the kids are well behaved? Or are we trying to achieve that they go into school and give out leaflets about our toddler group or something? What is the thing that we're trying to achieve with children? And if it is, which I think it is, if we want the children to be growing up with an active, vibrant, living faith, actually, we need to be talking about that all the time. Not just perhaps once a year if we have an annual meeting or something and we mention it for 2 minutes. We need to be actually bringing it into conversations of our PCCs, of our Deaneries, whatever networks you're in, even into conversation with parents and carers in church, just as you go. When was the last time anybody said to me at church, I'm praying for you as a parent because it's a really tough job? I honestly cannot remember that. And that's just such an easy thing to do, isn't it? And so powerful to me as a parent. But there seems to be a bit of a taboo about it, that we can't quite say that for some reason. We can't talk about it. I did some study about grandparenting as well, and the same thing there. So many of them were saying, we never talk about our grandchildren in spiritual terms in church. People never actually say, oh no, you're having a real difficult time with your grandchildren. Let's pray, and just that language of talking about it and bringing it into the open is so, so powerful. I've got this, I'm trying out this QR code thing. I don't know if this will work, but if you're into QR codes, you can click there. It'll take you to my website, which isn't a very good one, but it serves as a repository. If you want this, I can give you the link later or my email address. So we basically did a piece of work about this. What plan do we need for children's ministry? And at the very end, there's a page as an appendix of questions that you could use in your various meetings, PCCs, Deanery networks, whatever it is, just to start you thinking, how much do you know about what's going on in the church right now about faith, or that kind of thing. So that's just there. Again, we'll talk a bit about that this afternoon. But what I was going to say, which is interesting that the people before were saying that, about listening to families of what the real need is. Now, I, this week, doing some other research about parenting in Liverpool and what's the gaps of support for parenting in Liverpool, not just churches, but we're working with Liverpool City Council. So I've been going around different support groups and network groups asking what's going on, and it's heartbreaking. One group, particularly kinship carers, that, got to be honest, I wasn't particularly aware of before. And where families, often grandparents, but doesn't have to be, who basically take on raising their grandchildren or another family member. And just how hard it is and how isolated they feel. So people were travelling all across different parts of Liverpool to come to this one coffee morning that happens every week, and just talking about the lifeline that is. And I'm thinking, why can't we do that as churches? Specifically target groups like that who are really struggling, just want someone else to talk to who's going through the same thing. You know, thinking about how we can gather that. We also care for a relative of ours who's an adult with Down syndrome, and he moved recently to live near us, and I was just so disappointed when I was looking for activities and things for him to go to. Just the lack of provision that's there. And it's been, again, quite heartbreaking to take him to a couple of churches and just see, just nobody talks to him, you know. And again, it's that thing of, if we listen, if we actually look around, where are the gaps? Where are people desperate for help and support just to talk to? Actually, we can see there's real opportunities there. And so, yes, another thing is, we can listen and observe where the gaps are. But one thing that I find so helpful is to just sit down on the floor. I've got a video I'm going to show in the workshop actually of this. But sit down on the floor and just watch what happens on a Sunday. On a Sunday when you're not busy doing 50 million jobs, which might not ever happen. But just deliberately put yourself a bit to the side so no one will come and talk or whatever. They probably think, why are you having a sleep on the floor? But watch. Do people in your church talk to children? Do children feel, look at their body language. Do they feel relaxed and comfortable? Do they feel valued and part of what's going on in your session? If they run around or, you know, make a bit of noise, what's the reaction that happens? You know, what are you noticing? And I think sometimes, I know for myself, we're so busy, you've got to set up the kids session, got to do the reading, got to do this, that and the other. We don't see what's going on. And so my kind of call to you really, as people who do have influence and can bring about change, is to start to try and chip away in our congregations, PCCs, networks, wherever we're having those conversations, to just start to try and bring a bit of change of ethos, so that together, as the UK churches, we can be more intentionally welcoming of children and families, so they feel they want to be there. Because the fact of the matter is, as I said at the start, families are busy, right? But they choose what they want to do. So my kids this afternoon have chosen the particular dance class. I could tell you so many stories about dance classes they've been to that were not welcoming. They don't want to go again. Simple as that. They choose what they want to go to. You know, I can't think of what other clubs, guides, and all different things. They've chosen that. Now, we're busy, but we make time for those things because they want to be there. So what will it take, that kind of dream I was talking about at the beginning, about, our church is filled with families, where families feel welcome, where families feel relaxed and comfortable, valued and part of what's going on. What will it take to get there? And I don't think it's putting on 10 more activities each week, or putting out loads more emails, or putting together lots more activity sheets. I think it's just by shifting our ethos, our way of working, to be much more relational, to be talking, to be bringing this all into the conversations that are going on. And so I'm just going to skip out those two there. Oh, that's not come up. Oh, here we go. I didn't know. I forgot I'd done this as like a jazzy one. I'll just put them all up. That must have been in a moment when I was feeling very creative. I don't know. Anyway, so here we go. This is my kind of parting slide, really, here. What would it look like? How could we embed an ethos of working in partnership, working together? The title slightly disappeared there. If we include children more fully in church life and decisions, again, Liverpool diocese, one of my examples there, they have at times had a children's council, and the children are asked, what would be helpful? What do you think we should be doing? And actually, especially now with all this talk of the environment, and that children are really wanting to be missional, to talk to friends at school, to invite them to do this kind of thing. And yet we often overlook that and don't involve them in what's going on in our decisions. But even if, you know, one child, when I was interviewing them, what do you want from church? They wanted a super duper helter-skelter slide and water park and all this to be in the church. I don't think that's quite realistic. So we'll get answers like that, of course we will. But we'll also get very profound answers like, well, I just want to be able to pray for someone who's struggling, you know. And actually, do we facilitate that? Do we share the prayer needs of somebody who's just had, you know, broken their hip or something, you know, or someone who's in hospital or someone whatever? Do we share that with the children so that they can pray? And then asking the children, what prayer needs have you got? Oh, okay, you've got the SATs. Well, come on everyone, let's pray for that. You know, just a simple thing, but so powerful. Again, it's not piling on the work, it's just reimagining how things could look, how we could build this ethos more. Speaking regularly with parents about their child's faith. Again, why is it a taboo subject to say to parents or carers, how's your child doing, you know, with their faith? Do they like reading Bible stories? Oh, and then perhaps saying, there's a really good Bible that I've seen, which is really engaging. So one of my kids loves Minecraft, okay? So there's a Minecraft Bible, right? So, you know, something like that. You could suggest that to someone whose child is struggling to connect with the Bible. Or someone else who's saying, well, they just keep asking questions about science and how does God and science connect together? And actually for that parent, that can just be such a difficult place. If we have a chat to them about that, again, you might not feel equipped to talk to a child, but you can talk to a parent about God and science, can't you? You know, I don't know much about science, although I have studied bits over the years, but I can still have a conversation with someone about that. I could actually go and look something up on the internet and find it a useful resource. And again, I'll signpost some of them in the workshop. Some great organisations, Care for the Family and Parenting for Faith particularly, who have so many resources there that we can just signpost to families. You know, we don't need to go and reinvent the wheel. So having those conversations. What about intentionally changing those underlying messages of the role of parents? So rather than saying, bring your child to church and, you know, for the 45 minutes or an hour that they are getting taught by us, that will sustain them through life and be all of the spiritual input that they need. Actually, we could say, well, you are with your child for parts of the other 6 days of the week. Surely there are more opportunities for you as parents and carers. So here are some ideas of how we can do that. But actually saying that. So when I lead services at my church, I say that sometimes when the kids are going out to their group, I say, right, now we know parents, you know, you do so much, you have so much input on your children during the week about faith, but we're going to do a little bit now. So, you know, let's pray for the kids and for you as they go out. So it's just changing, or in the prayers that we're having in sessions from time to time to pray for parents in terms of their role of discipling their children's faith. Engaging the congregation more relationally and collaboratively. So this sense of how can we all as a congregation support parents? How can we make them feel that it's okay if their child runs around and makes a bit of noise? They don't need to wear slippers, you know? How can we make them feel it's okay, you know, that when they arrive, they're totally exhausted. They can't control their child who just wants to run up and down and touch the, you know, bottom stair of it or whatever it is. So just thinking, and that will be different in each of our contexts, how this will look, but just thinking about that. How can we bring this shift? Meeting children's leaders. So important. Again, one of the studies we did, we asked this question of children's leaders, people who run Sunday groups, that kind of thing. How often do you talk to your clergy about what's going on? Once a year, maybe never. They were the typical responses. Actually, the other thing is, just to get another little hobby horse of mine in here, the statistics of how many people involved in children's work are just feeling so overlooked, so devalued. It's just awful, you know, and I know we all feel totally exhausted, but actually it is hard work, isn't it, to go and run a kids session or something on a Sunday morning and to try and keep kids engaged. And I can't remember, I know there's various initiatives going on, aren't there, in terms of trying to recruit more people to be involved in children's work. But if we recruit more and then let them feel devalued and not appreciated, they're just going to go in a few years and then we'll still have the gap. So absolutely, speaking, again, it's not a new job on your list, but just when you see them, oh, how did it go? How did it go? Or, you know, quick text, I'm praying for you today as you're running this session. Just every now and then making them feel valued. And then again, listening. So perhaps something isn't working. Perhaps it's not working for them, you know, to come back in and do a prayer at the end because it's all really awkward and really hard. So change it, so be open there. And then a sense of an ethos of mentoring children as active in our churches. So rather than thinking, well, you know, when they're 18, you know, then we might get them on the rota because we need some more people on the rota. Actually, what could they be doing now? How can we actually have this sense of valuing and including now? So they're just my thoughts to leave you with. As I say, we'll unpack those a bit more this afternoon for those who come to the workshop. But again, I just want to reaffirm and encourage you. Any little thing you do to support a child or a family in their faith journey is just so powerful. So well done. You know, just keep doing those little tiny steps, those little conversations. Just make such an amazing difference. So well done and thank you. Yes, we could do questions. Yes.
Sarah, thank you. Questions. We've got 6 minutes. Number one.
Sarah, Robert Stone, Winchcombe Parish, lay chair. I was very lucky. My best friend said, come to church. So I went to church. And for years benefited from the children activities and ended up for 11 years being a youth leader. It was one of the happiest times of my life. There's one area in your talk which you haven't really covered. No children. Will you be covering that in your seminar later on?
So if you're in a church with no children there, yeah, we can unpack that, definitely. Yeah. By the way, sorry, there were many bits I didn't include. I was saying, wasn't I could talk for days about this, but no, that's a really good one. Thanks for raising it.
I know it will vary in different churches because of size and capacity and style of worship, etc. We are church planting ground up, and we've deliberately not gone for children's groups, that we're sitting around the table with the adults and the adults are engaging with them. Now, obviously contexts were different, but I just wonder what your reflections were on children's groups as opposed to sort of whole family discipleship round the table, cafe style in church.
Absolutely, and that's my absolute favoured approach, is to have that all age thing. But it's hard sometimes, isn't it, to achieve that, especially if you've already had the siloed groups. To then try and get people to mix is hard. So I think to set it up like that is great. But the richness that children get from seeing, oh, there's lots of people who actually pray. It's not just my parents, you know, and so many more things around that. It's so rich. And again, you know, for those churches who don't have many people who are volunteering to do kids work, that's what I say. Well, just don't do it then. Do it all together. Because actually that model of community life that we see is so powerful. So yeah, I could talk about that one all day as well, but absolutely, yeah, no, that's great, thanks.
Diane Murray. I come from the Diocese of Europe, and I live in Strasbourg. I'm sorry to introduce this, the awful S word, but what influence do you think safeguarding and all this emphasis that there is on it has had on children's work? Because we've had people who said, oh, I wouldn't mind helping in Sunday school, but if I've got to go through all that, it's a bit of a fail. So I was just interested in your output on that.
Yeah, no, safeguarding, really good topic. And it's one of the things that, so in my church, perhaps like many of yours, we had depleted numbers on our children's team post-pandemic. So I tried to recruit people who didn't particularly want to do children's work, but, you know, were really good at something. And there is that barrier. Now, to fill a form in and do a DBS, I don't think is a particularly big ask there. But what I always say to people is having a DBS doesn't mean that person's safe to work with children anyway. So of course we do need to do DBS checks, and I've had a couple of times when that has shown up something that was like, oh my goodness, why are you even trying to work with children? So it is very important to do those checks. But then the flip side of, sorry, I've forgotten your name there, who was doing the all age type activities, we're not checking people there, are we? You know, we're not vetting people as they walk through the door. Sorry, you can't come in unless we do a DBS check. So I think actually what it is about is having, you know, if this room was mixed of children and adults, then actually we'd all just be looking out, wouldn't we? To foster that culture of looking out for, you know, looking out for one another. And if we see something concerning, then actually perhaps we should say, I don't think you should actually be doing that with that child. And have that culture where you say, actually, it's okay to do that. Okay to say to people if you see things that are concerning, but also to free people up, because I think that's perhaps what's behind a lot of what you're saying. Again, in the sort of grandparent research, people were saying, oh, I don't think I can go and talk to children on a Sunday and say, how was your week? Because they might think I'm trying to do something, you know. And again, that's just so sad, and I think that's perhaps some of what you're saying there. But how, again, can we, from the front, explain that and say, no, you might not have done that, but, you know, keeping things open, you know. In this room, we can all see, actually, what's going on. If we went off and said, right, you two go off in that room quietly over there, you know, that's not very good. So I think it's about just looking sensibly at what our policies and procedures are, but not so that they bind and restrict us, but so actually they can free us and say, yeah, why can't we all just, you know, if a child goes down to the local shops, they're not going to have all the people vetted, are they? It's different if you're having people running a children's group with no parents and carers there. That is different category. But in our churches, in our services, in things that are going on where we do have that intergenerational mix, we just need to try and foster that open culture, I think. So great question, thanks.
Can I just comment?
Yeah.
We heard Paul this morning talking about an alternative ending. What happened if the boat had sunk? Now, I seem to recall that Jesus, they were looking for him and he was teaching in the temple, you know, and he had this thing about suffer the little children. What would have happened if they'd have had a safeguarding officer then?
I know, yeah. There you go, yeah. And I think that's the thing, isn't it, that we do, you know, I say that to people, you know, it is okay to show that you love and care for children, that's okay. But, let's just be sensible about how we do that, you know, keeping things open, you know, and that sort of thing. And, you know, a little side hug, that's okay, you know. But just kind of, again, it depends on the context. Is it what the child wants? I always think that's a very important guiding thing. You know, is it child-led, or is it because actually you see sometimes saying people, you know, adults who just need to cuddle children, you think that's not child-led, is it? But also, if somebody else saw me doing this, would that be, you know, what would they think of that? So I think just having conversations about some of this within your congregations and saying that these are the parameters. Now go and talk to children. I think that's just really sensible and helpful. Great. I think we're on lunch now,
we're
are we?
on time for lunch. Sarah, thank you hugely, and we look forward to your workshop too. Thank you.